Today we're going to work together to make some face scrubbies out of a cotton yarn. So the yarn that I've chose to use is by Loops and Threads, their classic cotton. So I take a peek and see what size needle it's recommending, and it's recommending a 5mm hook. This is the yarn itself. It's a little bit scratchy, a little bit firm, not the softest yarn I've ever used. And I'm actually deciding to go with a 4mm hook, one that's a little bit smaller, just because I want my scrubby to be a little bit tighter. You can use which size you want to use, but I wouldn't go much larger than a size 5 or you're going to have a very loose face scrubby, which, I mean, if that's what you want, that's totally fine. So we're going to start by making a slip knot, and you can kind of watch back a couple of times how to make that knot. It's really quite simple to make, and this just makes sure that we have a good firm beginning to do. I always like to leave a pretty long tail on it, so a couple of inches at least. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to crochet that tail in. You can also leave it behind, but you start by making 3 chains. So you saw the way that I just wrapped it around, and then you pull it through that first loop. And so again, I'm weaving my tail into here, and that just means that I don't need to weave it in later. But again, you can just leave it behind if this seems too complex or too confusing to you. Once you've finished your chain 3, we're going to work the first stitch of that chain to make a bit of a circle that we're then going to use. This is an alternative to doing a magic ring. I find it much easier to connect into that first stitch and then do a slip stitch through the 2 stitches there, and to continue working off of that. So we'll chain another 2 on, and that will be our first double crochet. We're going to work a total of 12 double crochets into that middle circle. So I'm just demonstrating here how to do a double crochet. And it's a very simple pattern altogether. The trickiest part of this is going to be fitting all 12 double crochets into this middle circle. So if you're finding you're capping out at, like 10 or 8 or whatever it is, that's totally fine. You can just continue with however many stitches you want to put in that circle. I wanted it to be a little bit more tight and quite cohesive, so that was why I went with the number 12. And so this, like I mentioned, is an alternative to doing a magic ring. I'm not a huge fan of doing the magic ring in crochet because I just find it so much more difficult to manipulate. And so this is just my personal preference. You certainly could start with a magic ring. Once you get your desired number of double crochets on there, you're just going to slip stitch back into that first chain 2 that you made, and then that's going to create the first ring of our face scrubby. And so from there, we're going to kind of repeat this pattern where we're going to chain 2, and that's going to be our first double crochet, and then we're going to double crochet 2 into each space. So our first one, we've already got 1, so we're going to double crochet another into that space. And then we're going to continue around the ring, and each space that there is, we're going to put 2 double crochets into there. So you'll do your first one, and then your second one goes back into that same hole. And this is going to start to expand our circle. So this row of the face scrubby is going to be a larger circle than the previous row. And you're just going to continue this around until you've put 2 double crochets into every single hole. So no matter how many stitches you started with, if you started with 8 or if you started with 12 like I suggested, you don't need to count how many you're doing aside from making sure that you have 2 double crochets in each spot. And so now you can see I've made it almost all the way back to the end. I've just got one more hole there to do my double crochets in. So I'm just getting that started. Now we're back at the top of the row, so again I'm going to slip stitch into that first chain that we made, and that's gonna again create that finished circle. And I wanted these face scrubbies to be a little bit bigger, so we're gonna do one more row around, same as we have been. So we start by chaining 2, and then we double crochet again into that first stitch that we did there, because that chain 2 counts as one of our double crochets, so then we need another double crochet. And then we continue around the circle doing 2 double crochets in each open space. So now I'm back again at the top of the circle. So I'm going to finish this off by doing my 2 double crochets in the last stitch. And now as you can see with this bigger circle, it looks like there's one more stitch there. That's where we started. So what I'm gonna do to create a little bit more of a cohesive look is just do one more double crochet into there, and then I'm gonna connect with my slip stitch to the chain 2. Now I also wanted to make a handle on the top of this. This is technically done, but what I wanted to do was add a handle. So to do that, I'm going to chain 10 to make that little bit of a loop to be a handle. And this I like because then when I'm done using it, I can hang it up, let it dry, and then, you know, if I'm just rinsing my face and I want to use it again, then it's all ready for me. So after I chain 10, I'm going to go back into where we started that chain from, that little loop there, and I'm just going to slip stitch it into there. So you can see I'm just going to pull through again. And then we're going to make our yarn a nice long tail for us to trim off. So you can see I'm pulling it out here, and then we'll just give it a quick snip. And then I just want to pull it nice and firm to make sure that it's nice and tight there. Then you can see that is our completed face scrubby. We'll also want to weave in the tail. So I'm just gonna briefly show you guys one of my favorite ways to do that. And so I definitely take a nice and thick needle, one that's got a very large hole in it, because it makes it quite a bit easier to get that cotton on, and it reduces breakage and stuff like that. And so what I'm gonna do is I'm going to weave up and down these edges here, and that is fairly invisible along the stitch. So I do that to kind of give it a little bit of length. And then I'm going to weave back down into my double crochets, and I'm trying to make this as invisible as possible. So I go into, you know, kind of some of the thicker stitches. I try to make sure that I can hide it in behind, and especially where we connected all of those double crochets, there's quite a thick sort of edge there that I can tuck the needle into, and virtually I can hide the tail the whole way around that if I wanted to really give it quite a bit of security. And then once I weaved it in, I'm just going to tug at it a little bit, make sure that the tail isn't warping the shape at all. And then I give the remainder of the tail a quick snip, cut it off, get rid of it. give it another bit of reshaping, and here it is. I made a couple of these and I'm super excited to start using them.